And when I come to these moments, I have to ask myself, what am I going to do? Am I going to do what society tells me I should do at this moment, stick in here? Or am I going to iterate and reinvent and go through that journey that can be a little bit tough? It can be a little bit messy. It can be a little bit disorienting. Will I just go through that journey and come up on the other side reflecting another aspect of myself?
Welcome to Evolve Leadership, the arena where high-achieving leaders are challenged to redefine their limits. My name is Angus Nelson. I grew up in the United States and I now live in Lisbon, Portugal. I'm an executive coach and I've spent my career advising and training leaders from startups to Fortune 500 companies. And here's what I've learned. An old, ineffective leadership framework will always keep you on a hamster wheel, consumed with work-life balance, burnout, and stress. Here on the show, each week we'll help you rethink the path to achievement. We'll help you discover new principles, new philosophies to the modern leader. Look, the world is relentlessly changing, demanding a new era of leaders. It's time to redefine your limits. So enter the arena, my friend. It's time to evolve.
Welcome to the Evolve Leadership Show. And if you are experiencing rapid change in your business, rapid growth, rapid challenges, economy shifting under your feet, so to speak, today's interview is going to be powerful for you. We're talking to Ahmad Mansur. He's a leadership futurist, an executive coach, and an ed tech entrepreneur. He's worked with former Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger to bring more jobs to California. He was a dean of a college, and now he helps leaders navigate the complex global challenges and big shifts in the future of work, innovation, and the economy. So let's dive in to our interview with Ahmad right now.
Hey, Ahmad, so great to have you join us on the show. How are you today?
Angus, how you doing, my man? I'm perfect, man. It's great to hang with you on in this conversation today, man. Good to see you.
All right. So today I want to jump into kind of, some of the stuff that we had discussed, talking together. You're, jumping around from country to country, running your business, doing consulting, and going around this whole element of reinvention, innovation, looking at the future. I want to back up a little bit in your story. You grew up in San Francisco and it was during a really interesting time. And I think that kind of set the stage. You want to kind of take us into, your backstory, where you came from, how you got your education, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah. I tell folks all the time, I was the luckiest person in the world. I grew up in San Francisco in the 70s.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone could choose a time and moment in history where you have an opportunity to kind of be in this space, in this historic neighborhood called the Fillmore, where it's right in the middle of the city, and you have poets and intellectuals and artists and criminals, everyone coexisting. And, one of the things I used to call it, was the Serengeti, because everyone was there, and it was just this very interesting place. So as a young kid, I had an opportunity to experience what that means, that grassroots power. That's the word I was looking for. And then I got shipped out, not shipped, I was fortunate to go to a very prominent, one of the oldest prep schools in San Francisco, where I had a chance to really hang out with CEOs, the kids of CEOs and generals. And actually, the year that I was there, believe it or not, the lieutenant governor, the governor, the CEO of Intel, and the mayor of San Francisco, they were all graduates of my high school. And they were all in office at the same time.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And you came up out of that and you were exposed kind of to this, other world. And that prepared you when you got off to college. Kind of share both college and then your own iterations into grad school and career.
Yeah, first I would say from when I was in high school, one of the really cool things that came out of that was that when I got there and just being around, these elite, wealthy families, first there was a disconnect. And then I realized that I can learn something here. I did learn something. And that was that the people I were around, they had this sense of they can do anything. And I did not necessarily see that attached to wealth. I didn't see it attached, even though I'm sure that's what influenced it because they had that life. But what I took from it was that just simply they saw the world as theirs. And I didn't attach that to anything other than a mindset. And that was something that always sat in the back of my head growing up. And then later I would find myself in graduate school 2 times. First, in business and leadership. And then later on, when I would say having an opportunity to really delve into something that I was really interested in, which was learning. And so I went back and got my graduate degree in learning and development.
And later that manifested in you being a dean of a college, in and amongst many other things. You served with Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger with some of the plans that he was doing through the 2009 financial crisis. 2017, you're in an executive leadership role. That was your role there as the dean. All of that was these elements of iteration. And you and I were sitting over the tacos and we were talking about our careers and how crazy our paths had kind of unfolded. It's like when I started, I had no idea it was going to, end up the way that it, has thus far.
Absolutely.
Take us through kind of like that, like you said, odyssey.
Well, it took me in college to realize that that a regular linear path wasn't going to be for me, even though I tried to, because there was pressure, social pressure, family pressure, cultural pressure to do the right thing, which was to, take that traditional route and, get the job and the wife and, make the money. But, I learned early on that that I was actually being driven by something differently. And that was around purpose. I kind of knew that internally early on, that purpose was critical. And so as I kind of started along this professional path, I went into the consulting world. I worked with some of the largest management consulting firms in the world. And I found myself, having to really look at 2 things. First, the unbelievable innovation that sat inside of these companies. They were sending me to some of the biggest thinkers and seeing the most innovative technologies around. But I was being deployed on projects that wasn't necessarily getting me amped up. It didn't bring life for me. I mean, there was one moment where I was in Boise, Idaho, and I won't name the company, but I was actually in charge of making their supply chain process for a paper making company better. And I sat there, I went back to my hotel, and I just kind of had this moment where I said, there has to be more. And I kind of broke down as I sat in this big suite looking at the mountains, But I broke down and said to myself that I needed to find a way to take this incredible knowledge that I'm learning, but to really see this applied in a different way. And the universe actually, they provided that. Maybe a couple of years later, in this very inadvertent way, I was put on an assignment with the LA school district to help them with their IT system. And I discovered education and saw how I could have an impact in developing humans, developing their capacity to create opportunities for themselves. And so I went down that road and ended up leaving the company and working for a national ed tech company, a Clinton initiative. And I was working in these communities across the United States, and I loved it. And so that put me into this education space, and it's taken me through a journey that subsequently had led to me becoming a dean at a college. And so to answer your question, Angus, it just like we were talking about, at the taco place.
Yeah.
I look at life and I look at my path as life cycles. They're iterations. So I come to these moments. And when I come to these moments, I have to ask myself, what am I going to do? Am I going to kind of do what, society tells me I should do at this moment, stick in here? Or am I going to iterate and reinvent and go through that journey that can be a little bit tough? It can be a little bit messy. It can be a little bit disorienting. Will I just go through that journey and come up on the other side reflecting another aspect of myself? And that's how my life cycles have been. And so I ended up becoming a dean, and that was a great experience for me. It was an awesome experience.
And then you went on from there. You also did some politics, if I remember correctly, in the story, and there was some whole other things with that that came into play. But the biggest piece of these iterations, and I'm talking with executives all the time, and the reason why many of them come to us is because they're at a crossroad of some sort where something's transforming around them, whether their company has raised a new round of funding, they've increased their headcount, they maybe have left one company for another, or they've been elevated to a new role, and something has shifted that's bigger or different than what they've known.
Absolutely, yeah.
And they've had to shift maybe their thinking or their believing or what have you in order to rise to that occasion, and they come to us and we kind of help them across that, that chasm. For you, what have been some of the things you've had to face in each one of those kind of iterations? And then B, what is something you would recommend for somebody in order for them to do the same?
No, great. And if you don't mind, I could tell you like one moment that really reflects everything you just stated and why, and this is not a commercial for you, but I'm happy to do so, and why we need folks like you to really help take people through that chasm, to really support them going through the chasm. Because I did have like this perfect job where I worked for the chancellor. So I worked for a 4-college system in the Bay Area. And I was the director and associate vice chancellor of economic development and industry partnerships. This sounds cool.
Yeah.
And this was in 2009, where my job essentially was to update all of our college programs, our training programs, to be aligned with industry and to be aligned with the economic activity of the region. And so that put me, in conversations and in networks that were with CEOs, with politicians, all of the different leaders from all of the different sectors. And so me and my colleagues, we thought that we were the masters of the universe because we were trained to actually develop people in regional economies. And then the 2009 situation called our financial crisis struck. And Governor Schwarzenegger, who was the governor at the time, was receiving hundreds of millions of dollars to really do what Obama at the time was calling creating shovel-ready jobs. And that was this approach to trying to keep people working during this crisis. So each region in California, the governor asked for us to gather, all of us masters of the universe, to gather, and work it out. And he said, bring your industry partners and make it happen. And so we gathered one time, and we were in a room, and it was many of us in there. And all of a sudden, instead of talking about how to create jobs, I had bought my industry partners. We were talking about how to get money and how to staff up our departments. And I looked around and said, whoa, this is our moment right now. And this is what we're talking about, staffing up, instead of talking about how to create job opportunities and to do all the things that we talked a good game about. Yeah. So I actually end up walking away from that meeting confused, disoriented, and really wondering whether what I did actually meant anything. And so that was actually a leadership moment for me that I couldn't turn my head away from.
Yeah.
So, that didn't leave me. And so probably for several months, I'm thinking about leadership and what could we do to be better leaders, to be more transformative for an economy that was shifting right in front of us. Mm-hmm. And so I got fortunate. I ended up becoming a fellow at the Aspen Institute. And they gave me an opportunity to actually think about this in a much larger scale. And then I went to them, and then they sent me to Harvard to study leadership with some of the best thinkers around there, and I did. And my career ended up changing at that point, because no longer did I look at leadership from the standpoint of being a gatekeeper. I began to really look at how leadership needed to be more distributed, and how there was there's a separation between leadership and authority. And that was the key thing that I learned, and I began to kind of build a whole architecture around that. So that changed the whole trajectory of my life, and many things to follow afterwards.
I'm sitting here taking notes here, leadership and authority. We may circle back on that, because I think that's a critical piece. So I want to back up. So you came out of, let me back up even more of that, high school, feeling limitless.
Yeah.
The world is your oyster. You could create whatever. And each step of the way, you've gone into these higher areas of influence, these higher levels of status, I suppose, with
Absolutely.
the people that you're in. Somehow you're hanging out with all the bigwigs of San Francisco with Schwarzenegger's money, or the government's money, or whatever, trying to figure things out. And then you get set off to Aspen Institute, and you're hanging out with these folk, and then you're off to Harvard. Like, each one of these steps is like incrementally more influence, more status, blah, blah, blah. So you are stepping into these bigger shoes. What's that step for you internally? Is it, I got this? Is it cockiness? Is it an oh shit moment? Like, what's going through your head as you keep stepping into these bigger arenas?
I would probably say a little bit of all of those. I think I never really been a climber. I'm not good at being a climber, so I couldn't have the mentality of that, okay, this is another step towards something, because that's not how I plotted my path. My whole deal from the time I was in high school was that I wanted to be on a path that wherever my curiosity led me, that there was not going to be anything that got in the way. That's how I kind of thought of my entitlement. And so when I began to think about leadership and then see this world open up to me, that felt pretty much the way things were supposed to go. Not necessarily to be at Aspen or to be at Harvard, but the fact that these domains that would allow for me to learn, to develop better insight, and to continue to be on a trajectory of change and transformation, that those things were available to me. And so as I kind of meandered through these spaces, there were many different feelings. First of all, I was like, holy shh. I mean, the first time, you go into these spaces, and then you kind of learn that people are telling you that whatever you want to think about, they're going to support you. Whatever you want to do, you're supported. And that's just an unbelievable feeling. It's just something that doesn't come naturally, because we always feel like there's, our mindsets could be that there's always some type of limitation. We live in a world that's based on scarcity, so that can very easily kind of get in your mindset. But being in a space where, you realize that kind of as you move up the food chain, so to say, that there are just an assumption that you're supposed to be there. If you're there for a reason. And that was a very difficult thing for me to kind of conceive based on my own kind of humble beginnings. But it's something that didn't feel so uncomfortable that I let it stay in my way. Because sometimes that can happen. You could feel like you're not deserving, or you're an imposter. And those things never really crept in for me. Now, I'm not saying that imposter syndrome hasn't crept in for me in my career. But when I'm on that trajectory, when I'm on that journey, it just doesn't show up. Like I'm kind of playing at a whole different level internally.
Yeah. So now you're playing at a level where we've come out of a pandemic. We are looking at wars in all sorts of crazy places, economies in flux. You're having to iterate how you're helping businesses. What does it look like you walking into some of these companies now in light of everything that's going on with the purpose that you now hold, for helping and serving and transforming? What are the things that you're finding yourself having frequently in conversations right here, right now?
Well, I think what's most interesting, and I could really speak to one instance where during the pandemic, I was asked by the executives at the University of Texas to kind of help them through this conversation around, what's next. And that was an incredible opportunity. And it kind of speaks to how my conversations had gone with many different executives subsequent to that. And that is that leaders have a huge challenge with complexity, and our brains cognitively is just not set up to deal with that naturally. Actually, complexity puts you in this space where you have to move out of this fight and flight attitude, which is really making you move towards, very quick quote pro solutions. And how can you hold space to really look at the dynamics that's happening? And so I call that sense making. So getting leaders to engage in more sense making, where they're able to kind of get on the balcony and look at all of these different moving parts and make meaning and make sense out of it before they start, pointing, the enterprise or their people into a particular direction. And so part of that is it's when I started dealing with leaders or working with leaders during this pandemic. Of course, Angus, the first thing you got to do is just listen and let leaders say what's going on with them. And I know that this is something that in your content and your work, you're always developing a platform for. Leaders wanted to emote. They wanted to really convey how uncomfortable it felt to be in this complex space and to make decisions and make moves in it that could be costly. And so the first piece for me was just to allow a place and a space for leaders to just convey what they were feeling. And then to have those type of conversations where you can help do some sense making with that. And then the other aspect of it was helping them do sense making, meaning actually going out and kind of gathering what's happening in the world politically, what's happening in the world from an innovation standpoint, from the technology, what's going on socially. And so, bringing all of that information to them so that they could really understand that this is nothing to be afraid of. This is just what is.
Hold on, say that again. It's nothing to be afraid of. It's just what is.
It's just what is.
Can you unpack that a little bit? That's a great phrase that just has a lot of meat in it.
Well, and I won't try to pull too far in many different directions, but it comes, I think about that from when I was growing up with my family, right? One of the things that they would often say in the world that they felt that I needed to deal with was that the things that come in front of you, it's just information, it's just knowledge. Don't let it pull you into this emotional space, kind of that flight or flight area of fear where you make crazy decisions. It's just information, it's data, it's people, it's technology, it's a lot of things, but just look at it and it's okay. It is what it is. And so that's something that I brought forward with a lot of leaders, is that, these are just things that are happening, and you can kind of look at yourself as someone who's in the eye of the storm, and get to kind of play with this. It's a term that I'm trying to think who said this. Maybe it was Kevin Kelly. Maybe Kevin Kelly. It was this idea of embracing the swarm. And so that was really what I was trying to convey. Embrace the swarm. So that was the kind of the key communique. And I think once you begin to get leaders or any individual to embrace the swarm, the other thing, which is always a challenge to our brains, and that is to get people to start thinking about the future, that that there are more than one futures that you can create, that there are possible futures. But, once again, we're told, and our brains tell us that we're kind of connected to one future, and that's what some people call your official future. Not knowing that there are many different ways and possibilities to make out there. And so really getting leaders to feel comfortable with envisioning the future. And that's not easy.
Yeah.
It's not easy because the future is like strangers. And the neuroscience talks about how, the future, thinking about the future it's like stranger danger. It feels so disconnected from us. So there's a lot of things that you have to do to make that connection happen. We can talk about what that is, but really this whole idea of envisioning a future, possible futures, really giving not only the enterprise, but leaders a little bit more agency around around how they can kind of handle these complex times.
Let me just pause for a second to say this. There is one trait that you will find in every successful leader, no matter their industry, no matter their role. And that trait is action. And we want to inspire ambitious leaders like you to bet on yourself and take action on those audacious goals that you see in your heart. That's why we created our 90-Day Accelerator. It's a results-driven, battle-tested framework designed specifically for high-performing leaders like you to get unstuck and propel you towards your goals. And in just 90 days, you won't even recognize the person you used to be. To be a part of this elite community, go to evolveleadership.org. Now, back to the show.
I like what you said, the stranger danger, when it comes to looking into the future. We as a species love the familiar. We love what we've always known. I was speaking at a big insurance company here to about 50 executives. And I was talking about, what could be in the average age was like 51. The tenure was like 20 years. Like, these individuals have been doing the same thing for a very long time, and they're looking at what's going on and they're shrugging their shoulders.
Exactly.
And they've got all these young people, they're trying to, keep in house and keep them, like invigorated, and they don't know quite how to keep them activated and interested and curious. And because it's threatening them.
Oh, absolutely.
And their egos, and they're like, I don't know, there's layers and layers of stuff, right?
It's a perceived threat.
All perceived. And so when you said, this element of embracing the swarm, of, looking at these things that are there and making sense of it, that sense making, I believe, is so important for all of us as leaders to stand back, like you said, to see what is, so that we're not impulsively reacting.
Absolutely.
Because typically that involves my trauma, my past, my history, my projection, like a whole litany of ridiculousness that has very little to do with what's actually standing before you, right?
Turns into a frenzy, man.
And it froths up, and then everybody's like, chicken with their heads cut off, versus the most calm, tranquil person in the room that can stand there and take in all the information and just be.
Yeah.
That's power.
Yeah. And what I would add to that, Angus, is that, once again, this is a commercial, but I'm happy to do this commercial. That's why it's important for your work. Because there are certain practices that it takes to move into that space. Like, it's easy to say, to deal with complexity, but dealing with it just means just not recognizing it. It takes certain practices that we have to do in the 21st century that's not going to go away. It's really how, not only just for leaders, but it's really how you need to be human. Like, there's no, all of us need to develop a practice that will enhance our capacity for self-awareness. Like, you can no longer glance over that. A leader needs that, right? So how do you get there? Like, you got to have some type of mindfulness practice. You got to.
Yeah.
I don't, I'm not saying you need to go and sit on a rock and meditate. Now, I do that, but I'm not saying that you need to go sit somewhere and meditate and get downloaded by the universe. But you need to find something that's going to allow for your mind, that plastic mind, to settle in a space where it can begin to make meaning of things without the synapses going crazy and keeping you in this place of anxiety. Like, we all have to develop that, especially as leaders. And that, if you want to understand complexity, you got to have some type of mindfulness practice for self-awareness.
For sure. And I would add to that, in mindfulness and with some of our clients, that can look like you just said, sitting on a rock, in meditation. I've said before, I am by no means a meditation guru, but I am a meditator in my infancy of the practice,
Yeah.
I'm learned about and I'm learning about this tapping technique where you tap on different parts of your body, and it's kind of a visualized or guided visualization. I've leaned into breath work.
Yeah.
Holy heck, where did breath, I had no idea, you just following different breathing patterns and how it resets things. It's amazing. But then this last piece is when you take that kind of initiative to get centered, to be aligned, to be present, only then can you have clarity. Only then can you take in all of the information and then approach it from a place of objectivity. So that's, to me, I just bump, set, and I want you to spike. So now we're looking at, I want you to put your futurist hat on.
Yep.
As we're looking into things that are unfolding, what are some of the patterns or trends that leaders need to be aware of? Looking at the future of work or the future of business, the future of the economy, you can take it from wherever you want.
Yeah, well, I think leaders have to be a little bit more expansive in how they look at the landscape. We've pretty much kind of bifurcated things into different sectors. So if you're in the business sector, it's so easy to hear a person in the business sector say, "Oh yeah, I don't know a lot about that social stuff or that community stuff," because they've learned to really look at business from a place of financialization, and that's totally fine. But in a complex world, the way it's unfolding, there's many things that you have to look at. You have to look at data, big data, and do some pattern recognition in that space and kind of figure out things. But you also have to look at the demographics of a society and a world to really see what's coming and see what's changing and shifting. So kind of the social forces leaders could no longer avoid. And the reality is that there are certain countries that companies go to now where their policies may say that, if you're going to do business here, you got to help us solve some of these problems. Like you just can't come in here and slap your logo up and think, that stream of income is going to come and perhaps leave our lakes, polluted or whatever. Like you have to be part of this larger stakeholder game. So that's why you hear terms like stakeholder capitalism, which is still being defined, but I think it's a good start, because what it's saying is that there are many different people, but more than anything, there are many different perspectives that you have to consider. And so that's one that I think that's key, is that leaders have to know how to manage multiple perspectives. Like, how do you do that? And those perspectives can feel uncomfortable, but there's a practice to how you go by dealing and managing multiple perspectives. And I think the leaders have to see that as a practice and as a skill. Another aspect, obviously, is the technology, and I think that's kind of the easy one for a lot of folks, because the innovations are in front of us, but we need to also understand what's happening with these innovations. It's shifting the way economies function. Like, for so long, we thought, and as leaders, we thought of things in a very rational way. We actually thought that the economy was rational. And so we thought that it would behave the way we wanted it to, and that we've kind of mastered that. And all of that was kind of based on scarcity economics, and pricing, et cetera. But what leaders have to understand now is that the world, and with these technologies, we're now in a disruptive world, So this whole idea of thinking rationally, it's not going to serve you as well. Actually, it's best to think that the world is irrational. And that's okay, because you can deal with irrationality. That's why we could talk about mindfulness practices and a bunch of other things. But when the book that was written, Thinking Fast and Slow by Kellerman, who won the Nobel Peace Prize, one of the big messages that he was saying in there was that we're not rational beings, And it seems like the only people that has known that for the last 100 years is being the people in marketing and public relations, because they always have played on our irrational behavior, But the more that we know that we're not simply rational beings, that there's an irrationality to us, then we can start as leaders working from that place as well. And so I think that's a critical one for leaders, is to really kind of understand that these technologies makes it where the world is disrupted. It's very nonlinear, that there's going to be shocks in the system. And when those shocks happen in the system, you could pivot. You can be going in a direction that you never thought about. And that's what happened with the pandemic. And I think that's the muscle that we need to learn. It has showed up in many different ways, but I think the pandemic made it so collective that no one could escape this idea that the world can make shifts through its shocks, and that it has an impact on how you think about things like the future of work.
It's almost like we haven't had enough disruption in our world which is ironic because we've had tons of it, but we haven't had such a big global impact to remind us we don't know what we're doing.
Yeah.
As much as we think we are, we don't know what we're doing. And it kind of brings us into this different, reality of what are we trying to do and what are we trying to create? And I think on a personal level, that's the opportunity. And, what the work that we do is what do you want to create? And if you put that into the business context, you know, these founders and startup and everything else, it's like you said, if this is disruption, this is the new normal. This isn't going anywhere. It's not going to go back to what it was. It doesn't have the same rhythms and routines of comfort and knowing what tomorrow brings. Like, we're in the midst of a season. Hopefully it won't last long, but it's change. And can you get to the place where you get comfortable in the unknown? And I love what you said, perspectives, walking in and seeing that there's different perspectives, that 2 perspectives, 3 perspectives, 4 perspectives could all exist simultaneously. Like, if you want to talk about the metaverse, like, humans are the metaverse, and they can all look at the same thing and have a different opinion. And that paradox, and getting comfortable and present in that paradox, again, that's where the true leadership and the true power lies, because you have to shed ego, shed opinion, shed, you know, your bias and the things perhaps even that you would hope it to be, so that you can see it for what it truly is.
Whew, that's powerful, Angus. Thing about perspectives is that, you know, there's this model that I use, that have all of these different people around the table, right? But right in the middle is mutual purpose, right? And so, like, you can all agree on what mutual purpose is, but you may have different perspectives on what it means and how to get there. But if you start with mutual purpose, now it's about what are the practices for engagement with everyone who's at the table. But when you have mutual purpose, then, like, you can go somewhere. And I don't think people understand that so often we're really shooting for the same thing. You know, it's like parenting, or some of the most basic things. I'm not a parent, but I do know this. You can be a parent and you can have all these different parenting styles, but at the end of the day, we all want to just see good kids raised, you know? And so if you take many different parents from many different types of spectrums, cultural spectrums, and you put them in this room with all these different perspectives, and if the mutual purpose is to create a safe space for kids to grow up and be the best human beings they could be, everyone around the table can agree with that. That's a mutual purpose. Now, the work now starts. How do you get there? You know, and so having these type of engagement practices as a leader is critical, and that's some of the work that I do. It's like, how do you get these different stakeholders to move in the same direction, knowing that they come from different places along the spectrum?
Yeah. Wow, I think that kind of brings us in for a landing. Ahmad, I think we could nerd out on a couple of these different things if we hung out longer. But if people want to get in touch with you, they want to follow along, where can they go? And you've got a book you're working on, The Pathfinder, I think it was called.
Yes. Well, I don't give away the name yet, because I love the name and I don't want to see it show up. I did get the domain for it. But what I can tell you that there's been a lot of pressure on me to do a leadership book, and that's coming. However, what I felt was more important was to do a book around pathfinding, because I think that's the time that we're in right now. And if you don't mind me kind of just speaking a little bit to this, Angus, and that is, as all of us in the 21st century have to realize that not only are we're dealing with obsolete systems that we've counted on, but once again, when you look at technology and what technology is allowing for us to do, it's allowing us to kind of move past the gatekeepers and to really define our sense of being and purpose in the world, where you can really develop and cultivate your own talents and be on your own path. And that's a whole different type of mindset. It takes a whole different way that you see your learning and your practice. And it's also another way that you see yourself in terms of your story, and that your story can come from your journey. And how do you actually create your own mythology? And so this book around pathfinding is really speaking to that. It's taking some of the things that we talked in the conversation. It's not about me, but it's taking my nonlinear path, and I say that my nonlinear path was an analog version for what the future path could be in the 21st century. Yeah. And so I think for me, because I have my own experience, but I also, as a college dean and educator, I know what it means to develop people's skills and their capacity. And then, as you know, someone who is now on my own path, from leaving all of my institutional and enterprise leadership behind to become, an entrepreneur and my own thought leader around things, that I'm on my own path that's in progress. This is the new iteration of me. Yeah. And so this book gives me a chance to actually put this all into something that I hope can inform not only young people, but also people who are in work thinking about how they could reconnect with themselves and get on their own path. To the older generation, because like the baby boomers ain't going away. Yeah. They're telling you right now, like, no, we're going to be, there's another version of us that we're going to take. Yeah. And so hopefully this book will provide some insight in that respect.
I think you need to finish that damn book, and we'll have you back, and we'll unpack that. By the way, Todd Herman, a guy I follow, another coach in my space, just posted a story about being at some restaurant. There was a 91-year-old man at this, maybe a hotel, I think it was. And he's like, well, what are you working on? He's like, oh, I'm doing my 10-year plan. Yeah. He was at 91 creating his 10-year plan. I'm like, come on.
Yeah, absolutely,
and it's never the end of the story. We get to create it. So Ahmad, if someone wants to get a hold of you, where do they go?
Thank you. I guess first, my personal website is ahmadmansur.com. And if you want to connect with me personally, you can find me at ahmad@futurepointglobal.com.
Nice. Well, Ahmad, thanks so much for sharing your wisdom, sharing your story and your insights. Really appreciate it. Can't wait to have a couple of drinks with you here in Lisbon next time you're on.
Our conversations are always cool. Thank you. And I look forward to seeing you in Portugal, because you said there were some other places that you had to show me. And believe me, I still have that as a place unchecked.
Come on.
I look forward to it, man.
Let's do it. Thanks, Ahmad.
All right, man. Thank you.
As we wrap up another episode of Evolve Leadership, thank you so much for taking time to invest in you. If there's to be any sustainable growth in your company or even in your relationships, you must grow first. And it's what I love to do for leaders, to help them grow, to challenge their thinking, sharpen self-awareness, to instill an unshakable confidence, and ultimately upgrade their sense of self. And we do this through our proprietary method called Agile EQ Plus, where we're leveraging agile leadership and emotional intelligence. We provide our signature training for individuals, and for businesses, we've designed a unique curriculum for company-wide learning and development. If you'd like to learn more about our training or to schedule a call, you can simply go to evolveleadership.org. And until next time, stay driven, keep climbing, and never stop evolving.